hotel lobby was quiet that afternoon. Some guests were checking in, a few were sitting in the lounge, sipping tea or scrolling through their phones. In one corner of the lobby stood a grand piano, black, shiny, and untouched. It looked more like decoration than something anyone would actually use. A well-known pianist had just arrived at the hotel. He had been traveling for weeks, performing in big cities and concert halls. He was tired, but still full of energy, the kind of person who carried music with him wherever he went. Dressed simply, he didn't look like a star. Most people in the lobby didn't even recognize him. He liked it that way. He sat near the piano, stretching his back and glancing around. His eyes stopped when he noticed a woman sitting alone on one of the soft couches. She looked like someone local, wearing simple clothes and holding a cloth bag. She seemed calm, but her eyes kept drifting toward the piano. It wasn't a quick look. It was the kind of look someone gives to an old friend that you haven't seen in years. He smiled to himself and stood up. Slowly he walked over to the piano, played a few notes, then turned toward the woman. "Would you like to play something?" he asked, his voice friendly. The woman looked surprised. She shook her head and laughed nervously. "Oh no," she said. "I can't play like you. I just like listening." "But it's just for fun," he said with a warm smile. "No pressure. Just one song?" The woman looked at him, then at the piano. A few people nearby were watching now. She seemed unsure. "I haven't played in years," she said softly. "My hands are rusty." "That's okay," he replied. "Music doesn't forget. You might be surprised." She sat still for a moment, thinking. Then slowly, almost shyly, she stood up and walked over to the piano. Her steps were slow, like she wasn't sure she should be doing this. When she reached the bench, she paused, looked around, then gently sat down. Her fingers hovered over the keys. They were shaking a little. She looked down, breathed in, and placed both hands on the piano. For a few seconds, there was silence. Then, a few soft notes came out. Simple, gentle, not perfect but full of feeling. The people around paused. Some looked up from their phones. Few turned their chairs to face her. The famous pianist stepped back, giving her space, his arms crossed and a small smile on his face. The woman began to play a slow tune. It was not flashy or fast, but it had emotion. It felt like a memory being told without words. Her eyes closed for a moment, and her hands moved with more confidence. The melody filled the air and reached every corner of the lobby. No one spoke. Even the hotel staff behind the counter stood still, listening. The pianist watched her with quiet respect. He could hear something deep in her music, something real. It wasn't about skill. It was about heart. She finished the song softly, letting the last note hang in the air for a few seconds, then silence again, and then people clapped. Not loudly, but with warmth, and the kind of applause that says thank you for that moment. Woman stood quickly, looking a bit embarrassed. She smiled politely and walked back to her seat. The pianist followed her with his eyes. He looked amazed. That short performance had changed something in the room. It had only just begun. The woman sat back down on the couch, trying to disappear into the cushions. She looked down at her hands and gave a small smile, almost like she couldn't believe what she had just done. Her heart was still beating fast. Her fingers were tingling, not from nerves, but from something deeper, something she hadn't felt. In years, the famous pianist walked over slowly and sat across from her. He wasn't smiling the same playful way as before. His face looked thoughtful, almost serious. "You weren't just playing," he said softly. "You were remembering something." The woman looked up at him, a little surprised. "I don't." "No," she replied. "It just came back. I wasn't planning to play anything. I didn't even think I still could." "You didn't play like someone who forgot," he said. "You played like someone who still has music in her soul." She gave a small laugh, trying to brush it off. "It's been a very long time. I used to teach kids piano a long time ago. Before life got in the way." He leaned forward. "Why? Did you stop?" The woman looked around the lobby for a moment. A few people were still glancing at her. Someone near the back had even pulled out their phone, maybe recording. She didn't like the attention, but she didn't seem angry either. "My husband got sick," she said finally. I had to take care of him. Then I took on a few cleaning jobs. I didn't have time or energy to play anymore. There was a pause. Life. Does that sometimes, she added. Takes things away quietly. The pianist nodded, understanding. He didn't push her with more questions. You should keep playing, he said. She shook her head. No, it's fine. That was just for fun. I'm nobody special. He looked at her carefully. That's where you're wrong. Just then, a small group of people nearby clapped again. One of them, a young girl, came over shyly and said, That was beautiful. I wish I could play like that. The woman smiled kindly. Thank you, sweetie. You can, if you start now, and keep practicing. Girl nodded and ran back to her family. The woman turned back to the pianist, shaking her head lightly. I didn't mean to make a scene. You didn't, he said. You reminded people what real music sounds like. She looked confused. But you're the famous one. You. Play in big halls with big crowds. I'm just a nobody from a small town. The pianist stood up and walked back to the piano. He placed his fingers on the keys and played a few fast notes, loud and showy, like something from a grand performance. Then he stopped and turned to her. See that? He asked. She nodded. Now come here and play again, he said. She frowned. No, I please, he said gently. Play anything you want. The woman hesitated, but something in his voice made her believe it was okay. She stood up slowly and walked back to the piano. The crowd had grown a little bigger now. People were curious. Phones were up again. She sat down. This time her hands didn't shake as much. She started playing again. A new melody, soft and flowing. Her body relaxed, her eyes closed. The music poured out of her like water from a full cup. It was sad, but peaceful. It was the kind of music that told a story without using words. The pianist stood beside her, not saying a word. He knew this moment didn't belong to him. The people watching didn't make a sound. They were completely still. And just like that, something simple became something unforgettable. Her fingers moved gently over the keys. But each note she played felt strong, full of life. It was not fast or loud. It was soft, smooth, and deep. The melody had something in it, a feeling that touched the hearts of those listening. It wasn't just a song. It was a story. Quiet, emotional story that didn't need any words. The people in the lobby stood still, listening. Even the hotel staff behind the counter leaned in. The loud world outside the hotel faded away. Inside, there was only her music. Her eyes were closed now. She wasn't looking at the keys anymore. Her body moved slightly with the rhythm, like she was remembering something far away. The notes flowed like a river, sometimes calm, sometimes full of little waves. It was the kind of music that makes people stop what they're doing and just listen. No one expected this from her. She looked like any regular woman, simple clothes, quiet face, calm voice. But when she played, she became someone else. Or maybe this was her true self. The pianist stood quietly beside her, not saying a word. His arms were crossed and his face was serious. He had played in front of thousands. He had worked with the best musicians around the world. But now, he stood watching a woman from a small town take over the room with nothing but her heart and a piano. A child sitting near. The staircase whispered, Is she famous too? His mother didn't answer. She just nodded slowly, her eyes still on the woman. Near the back of the room, someone pulled out their phone and started recording. Another person joined. Soon 4 or 5 phones were up. No one wanted to miss this moment. The song came to a gentle end. The last note stayed in the air like a soft goodbye. She slowly opened her eyes and looked down at her hands. For a moment, she didn't move, and she looked around and saw all the people watching. She looked surprised. Her cheeks turned a little red. She smiled, but it was a shy smile, like she didn't expect this kind of attention. Then the clapping started. First, just a few people, then more. Louder, stronger. People stood up, applauding her with warmth and respect. It wasn't the kind of applause given out of politeness. It was real, came from the heart. The woman stood up quickly, looking a little nervous. She nodded toward everyone and gave a small wave, then stepped away from the piano. She looked like she wanted to return to her quiet corner and sit down again, as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. The pianist stepped toward her and said quietly, "You just gave them something they'll never forget." She shook her head and laughed softly. "It was just an old tune I used to play, nothing special." He raised his eyebrow. "It was more than special." Someone in the crowd called out, "Play another one." Others joined in. "Yes, one more please." The woman looked around, clearly not used to this kind of attention. She smiled and waved her hand, "Maybe later." But even with that small answer, the people clapped again. The video taken by one of the guests had already been shared online. Within an hour, it would start spreading. People who had never met her would soon be watching her play, feeling that same unexpected emotion, but she didn't know that yet. Right now, she just stood beside the piano, quietly holding her bag, trying to calm her racing heart. The pianist leaned in and whispered, "You woke something up. In them, and in yourself." She looked at him, unsure what to say. He smiled gently and added, "You're not done with music." "Not yet." The woman stood beside the piano, still holding her bag tightly. Her eyes were wide, as if she was unsure whether what had just happened was real or a dream. The people had clapped for her, smiled at her, and asked for more. That hadn't happened in years. A part of her heart that had been quiet for a long time was now beating loud again. The famous pianist walked beside her slowly. He didn't rush. He spoke softly, not wanting to startle her. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked. The woman looked down at her hands. "When I was young, my parents saved 4 years to buy me a small keyboard. I used to play in my room every evening. Later, I studied music and became a piano teacher at a small school." She paused for a moment, remembering, "I loved teaching. I loved seeing children smile when they finally played their first full song. It made me feel useful, like I was doing something that mattered." The pianist nodded. "You were." She gave a sad smile. Then life changed. "My husband got ill. I had to stop teaching and find whatever work I could. I cleaned houses, worked at a bakery, anything to earn money. I packed away my keyboard in a box. I didn't touch it again." She looked up at him with soft eyes. "I thought that part of my life was over." The pianist didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at her with quiet respect. "Music doesn't leave you," he said. "It waits. And today, you showed it's still inside you." Just then, a hotel staff member walked over, smiling. "That was amazing, ma'am. We've had that piano in the lobby for 5 years. One ever made it sound like that before." The woman smiled politely. "Thank you. I didn't plan to play. He just asked me." The staff nodded toward the pianist. "Oh, we're glad he did." Behind them, someone said, "Is she a professional?" Another person answered, "She should be. That was the most beautiful music I've heard in a long time." The woman blushed and looked away. She didn't know how to respond to all this kindness. She was used to being in the background, quiet, invisible. But now, all eyes were on her. Then, the pianist's phone buzzed. He checked it and raised his eyebrows. "Someone just sent me the video of your performance," he said. "It's already online." Her eyes widened. "What? Oh no. I didn't even know they were recording." He smiled gently. "People record what touches them, and you touch them." "I'm not used to this," she said, shaking her head. "I didn't play to be noticed. I just remembered what it felt like, to feel music again. That's why it was so powerful," he replied. Later that evening, the video started to spread quickly. People shared it with captions like "Unexpected. Talent in a hotel lobby, and she plays with her heart, not just her hands." Comments poured in. Some asked who she was. Others simply said they cried while listening. She had no idea about any of it. She had gone home, made a cup of tea, and sat on her small couch, trying to understand the day. Looked at her hands. Still feeling the keys beneath them? For the first time in years? She felt alive. In another part of the city, the pianist was still thinking about her. He called a friend and said, "I think I met someone who reminded me why I started playing music in the first place." And far away, People who had never met her were watching the video, their hearts moved by a woman they didn't know. They didn't care where she came from. They just knew one thing: she had played something true. By the next morning, the hotel lobby video had already reached thousands of people online. What started as a quiet, personal moment was now being watched by strangers all over the world. People were sharing the clip with messages like, "This gave me chills. I cried watching this. True talent never fades." The woman had become a quiet star and she didn't even know it yet. She woke up to a normal day. She folded her blanket, made tea, and stepped outside to buy some bread from the nearby shop. She didn't use social media much. Her phone was old and she mostly used it for calls. She had no idea that her name, her face, her music were now spreading like wildfire at the same time. The famous pianist was sitting in his hotel room, smiling as he read the comments. News pages had started sharing the video too. One headline said, "Mysterious woman in hotel lobby plays with soul." Another said, "A simple tune that touched millions." The pianist reposted the video with a short message: "Talent like this can't be taught. It comes from life, loss, love, ... and truth." Later that day, he got a call from a music program director. "Who is she?" they asked. "Is she a teacher, a performer?" But he could only answer honestly, "She's just someone who still carries music in her heart." By the afternoon, the woman noticed something strange. While buying vegetables at the market, a young man looked at her and smiled. "Excuse me?" he said. "Are you the lady who played piano at the hotel?" She was taken aback. "Yes. How do you know?" "It's all over the internet." He said with excitement, "My sister sent me the video last night." That was beautiful. She didn't know how to respond. "Oh, thank you," she said, feeling both confused and nervous. She paid for her groceries and walked home quickly, her heart racing. Back at home, her neighbor knocked on her door holding a phone. "You're famous now," the neighbor said. "Look at this, over 1 million views." The woman took the phone and watched the video for the first time. She saw herself sitting at the piano, her hands moving slowly, her eyes closed. She could hear her own music the same way others heard it now. Her lips trembled. "I didn't know someone was recording," she whispered. "But aren't you happy?" the neighbor asked. "People love it," she nodded slowly. "I just never thought something like this would happen to me." That evening, her old students started calling and messaging. Many hadn't spoken to her in years. One message said, "You taught me more than music. You taught me how to feel." Another said, "I cried when I saw you play. You still have the same magic?" She read each message with tears in her eyes. All these years, she thought she had been forgotten. But now, her past had found its way back to her, to hurt her, but to lift her up. Meanwhile, the pianist was still answering questions from reporters. He refused to give out her address or phone number. She didn't ask for fame, he told them. She just played one song, and that was enough. Music schools and event organizers started reaching out, asking if she would like to perform or speak. But she stayed quiet. She didn't want the spotlight. She had already received something more valuable: kindness, recognition, and a reminder that her music still mattered. That night, she sat beside her old keyboard at home. She plugged it in for the first time in years. Her fingers touched the keys and a soft sound came out. She smiled to herself and whispered, "Maybe I'm not done yet." A few days later, the woman received a letter. It wasn't an email or a message through social media. It was a real letter, written by hand and delivered to her small home. The envelope had no fancy logo, just a simple return address from the local cultural center. Inside was an invitation. They were hosting a community concert the next weekend. Nothing big or flashy, just a small event where local musicians would perform. They wanted her to play one song. Just one. No long speech. No pressure. Just her and the piano. She read the letter 3 times. Then she placed it on the table and sat quietly for a long moment. Her mind was full. Part of her wanted to say no. She hadn't played in front of a crowd in years, except that one surprise moment in the hotel. But another part of her deep inside felt a little spark. It whispered, "Why not?" That evening, she sat by her old keyboard again. She pressed a few notes, then played a small tune she had taught children years ago. Her fingers moved slowly. At first, but then her hands relaxed. She played another piece. Then another. It was like meeting an old friend after many years, awkward at first, but then warm and familiar. Her neighbor stopped by and noticed the music coming from the house. "Practicing?" the neighbor asked, smiling. The woman nodded. "There's a concert. Small one. They asked me to play." "That's wonderful," the neighbor said. "You have to do it. The whole town wants to hear you again." The days passed quickly. Word spread in town that she would be performing. Even people who never cared much about music were planning to come. They had all seen the video by now. Some had watched it more. Then once they wanted to see her in person, not on a screen. They wanted to feel what they had felt that day in the hotel lobby. Finally, the night of the concert arrived. The small hall was full, chairs lined up neatly, soft lights hanging from the ceiling, a quiet buzz of people chatting and waiting. On the stage, a black piano stood under a single spotlight. She stood backstage, holding her hands together. Her heart was pounding. Her mouth was dry. But when the host called her name and she stepped out, the crowd welcomed her with warm applause. It wasn't loud or wild. It was gentle and full of respect. She walked to the piano, sat down, and took a deep breath. Then she played. The melody was slow, full of emotion. It wasn't perfect. She missed a few notes. No one cared. What they heard was something real, something honest. Her music was filled with years of silence, sacrifice, love, pain, and healing. It reached everyone in the room, not through their ears, but through their hearts. When the song ended, she looked up. The crowd stood up, one by one, clapping. Not for fame, not for show, but because they felt something they couldn't explain. She stood and gave a small bow. Her eyes were wet, but she was smiling. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a forgotten teacher or a tired worker. She felt like herself again. After the show, people came up to her, young old friends, strangers. Some hugged her. Some simply said thank you. One little girl asked if she gave piano lessons. The woman bent down and smiled. "Not yet," she said, "but maybe soon." That night as she walked home, the stars were bright above her. She looked up and whispered, "Thank you for not letting me give up." And far away, someone else was still watching her video. Maybe for the first time, feeling something real in a world full of noise. The concert had passed, but something inside her had changed forever. The woman was no longer hiding her music. She still lived a quiet life, wore the same simple clothes, walked the same streets. But now she carried a quiet light inside her. It was as if music had returned to her, not just through her fingers, but into her heart. She didn't chase fame. She didn't look for big stages or big crowds. She simply went back to doing what she always loved, teaching, sharing, and playing from the soul. Every evening, soft piano sounds came from her little home. People passing by would stop for a moment just to listen. It became a kind of peaceful routine in the neighborhood, a sound of comfort, a sound of truth. Soon, children from the area began coming to her. Some came with their parents. Others came holding small notebooks, asking shyly, "Can you teach me piano?" At first, she said no. She wasn't sure she could handle it again. But one day a little boy knocked on her door with a toy keyboard in his hands. He said, "I don't know how to play, but I want to make people feel like you made them feel." Looked at him for a moment. Then she stepped aside and said, "Come in." From that day on, her small living room slowly turned into a place full of music and laughter. She gave lessons to whoever came, rich or poor, young or old. She didn't charge much. Sometimes she didn't charge anything. She said music is a gift, and gifts are meant to be shared. The famous pianist who had first discovered her in the hotel never forgot her. They stayed in touch. Every once in a while, he would call and ask how she was doing. He even invited her to one of his concerts in the city. She sat in the front row, proud and calm, watching him perform. After the show, He introduced her to the audience. This woman, he said, reminded me what real music is. Not fame, not money, just truth. People clapped for her even though most didn't know her story in full. But they felt something when they looked at her, something honest and rare. Back home, she still walked to the market, still greeted her neighbors, still lived in her small house. But now, people smiled at her differently. Not because she was famous, but because she had become part of something beautiful. She never got used to the attention. In fact, she preferred when people forgot the video and just came for the music. Years passed, but her lessons continued. Some of her students went on to play in schools, in churches, and even in small concerts. They always remembered what she taught them, not just how to play the keys, but how to listen to their own hearts. One day a reporter came to interview her. He asked, "How did it feel when the world saw your video?" She smiled and said, "It felt like someone knocked on a door I had closed a long time ago. And when I opened it, I found myself still standing there." Before leaving, the reporter asked if she had any advice for people who feel forgotten. She nodded slowly and said, "You're not forgotten. You're just waiting for the right moment. Don't be afraid when it comes. Let it find you ready." That night, she sat at her piano, just as she always did. The room was quiet, the lights were low, and the keys felt warm under her fingers. She played a simple melody. Nothing fancy, just soft, true notes. And outside under the night sky, the world kept spinning. But somewhere someone heard her music and felt something, because even after all this time, her song still lived on.